So I'm here with David Roche to learn about what's happening now with Asia, or what's going to happen with Asia coming up following all the turmoil in the United States. David, what's going to happen?
Well, Asia's going to go down like the rest of the world. It's just happening later.
How does this compare to the Asian financial crisis?
It's different because in the Asian financial crisis, Asia had promised all the money. This time they've lent all the money, and they themselves invested in dollars heavily. And the fact of the matter is the dollar's turning around, so they're going to be squeezed on that front. And secondly, of course, their biggest customers, who are the United States, Europe, and Japan, are going down the tubes because they have no more credit to grow. So actually, Asia gets hit by two things. One is their exports collapse because nobody's going to be there to buy them. And the second thing is that, of course, their domestic financial assets like stock markets and property and all that stuff, that's over because that benefited from all the money flowing in from abroad, not only the current account surpluses but also hot capital, which of course their central banks in their wisdom failed to sterilize, so it just became domestic currency and pushed up property prices. All that is a receding tide, and with it goes prices. The price of all that stuff falls and people suffer.
But won't the Chinese consumer save us all?
No, because it's only a third of GDP. If you take the US consumer, it's 70% of GDP. Even the Indian consumer is 67% of GDP, and the poor old Chinese consumer, who's been buried under all that investment to make nice factories to export to the United States and feed the appetites of US consumers who are borrowing to consume. They weren't earning to consume, they were borrowing to consume. All that's over, so you got lots of nice empty factories, and the Chinese consumer is not big enough to make the difference.
Okay,
Fuck off. Sorry.
Please be quiet over there. Which is the country that is going to be worst hit?
Of all the world?
No, we're talking Asia.
Oh, Korea. Korea
Okay.
wrecks itself every 3 years. You know, first they have an Asian crisis, which they get wrecked in because their banks have a whole lot of foreign debts. Secondly, they have a credit card crisis because they lend all the money they couldn't borrow from abroad to their consumers, and they go down the tubes. And third of all, now they've got before this, they had a property crisis where they lent all the money to people to buy houses they couldn't afford. And now, guess what? They have a banking crisis because the banks have borrowed all the money from abroad to fund their balance sheets, plus a lot of money in the short-term markets in Korea, which have dried up because foreigners are no longer putting in any money to make the Korean won amounts in those markets grow. So Korea is, alas, screwed.
Okay, let's be a bit more positive. What's the country in Asia that's going to come out best in this?
Well, best is like, you know, saying I'm going to choose the prettiest hooker in a brothel where all the hookers are ugly. So you're choosing the least ugly. I guess Singapore, because they at least run their businesses with a reasonable degree of sanity.
Okay, how will Hong Kong fare?
Hong Kong will not do very well because Hong Kong is basically, it's like going to the horse races, you know. Every Hong Kong person bets on property or shares. Okay, tough luck. You can have horse races where all the horses lose. In this particular horse race, property and shares are losing. So guess who loses? Hong Kong.
Okay, so it all comes back to what's happening in the US and Europe that are going to pull us out of this?
Yeah, I can't see anybody else.
Okay, and how long is it going to take?
2.5 years.
So 2.5 years recession, depression?
No, not depression. I mean, you know, we got Bernanke up there, and he believes in helicopters and dropping money on people who need it, not people who earn it, people who need it. So that's enough to keep the patient in intensive care alive, even though he's dead. You know, you keep the machine blipping because you keep putting in steroids and electrodes, and so on and so forth. And so, no, we won't go into the 1929 recession. We're going to be into an extremely long and painful adjustment, which is all about using less debts to buy less products. So it takes a while. It's called deleveraging, and it's going to take 2 years.
Okay, excellent. So a tough 2 years ahead, and we have to root for the US and Europe to pull us out of this.
Yeah, there's no Deus Ex Machina except Europe and the US.
Okay, decoupling.
Oh, forget it. Decoupling was an exercise in the intellectually deficient.
Okay.
Just forget. How can you have decoupling in a world which is globalized, for Christ's sake? That's like saying, you know, in a freight train, the last wagon is going to move slower than the first wagon or faster than the first wagon. I mean, forget it. It's an exercise in intellectual inefficiency.
Okay, excellent. We have noises coming in here, so we'll have to end now.
And very short skirts.